Hello, welcome to School Health Presents Holistic Transitioning. I'm Dr. rheipp. This first video actually is going to take a look at this whole idea of holistic transitioning. What is it? Where does it come from? How are we already doing so many bits and pieces of it along the way? What's going to differentiate this from our standard ideas of transitioning? And why is it we need to revision things like this? The COVID-19 pandemic really brought to light the fact that we had been doing a wonderful job in special education, but what we weren't always doing was creating more of a holistic transitioning idea for our exceptional students. What I mean by that is this. Our idea of transitioning was linear, going from point A to point B, whether that be first transitioning into a school, perhaps even earlier, just starting with some basic skills, pottying skills, language skills, things of that nature. Then being able to move on into school, and perhaps then a formal transition from elementary to middle, and then a transition from middle to high, and then a transition from high school to whatever might be going on next. We know as therapists and as instructors that movement makes sense. We've got to take one step at a time. The unfortunate side effect was the fact that there will be things that may come up, environmental factors that we have no control over, that may disrupt that linear flow. In order to best prepare for those unknown things, we really need to rethink our idea of transitioning and create it in more of a holistic fashion. One of the things you might be thinking is, well, wait a minute, no, this is how we move our students along the way, and you're absolutely right. But what we need to do is also, as we're moving students along, be laying the groundwork for those activities, for those technologies, and for those ideas that will allow them to transition no matter what types of outside influence and environmental emergencies may arise. We ended up moving into a scenario where so much of what we did in special education was thrown off. Why was it thrown off? Well, obviously the routine was shattered. That routine was shattered because no longer were our students coming in and sitting before us each day. I even spoke with folks from all over, whether it be teachers, therapists, and parents. The therapists were the ones that were most often hit the hardest. I was working with a speech-language pathologist out in California who stated that realistically for her, when she was connecting with her students, and what she tried to do was just go through video chats on a regular basis with them, it was a scenario that created literal meltdowns in the kids. Why? They didn't understand why she wasn't physically there. They're looking at the screen. It is her. They're talking to her. And they don't understand why she's not there. They had difficulties understanding why they were still at home, what was going on. Even though they might see their peers on a screen for the districts that allowed that, or they at least saw their teachers on a screen, there was still a disconnect going on. I know that some of the districts tried to do things and did some wonderful things. I saw great ideas from throughout, whether it be coming to a front door and making sure you stood away from the door and communicating through glass, or even communicating down a driveway where you might have a megahorn and be yelling things to the individual. We were trying to get things across. It was much more than just trying to get a packet of materials over, although many times that was an important aspect too, because we needed to have those manipulative sides of things that our students could still continue doing the things they've done along the way. But now we've got to prepare for what's coming up. We've got to make sure we're ready to transition our students back into the school setting, but also keep in mind that there might be some point in time where they may get pulled out again. And we can't just think of, again, another pandemic pulling them out too. The other things we need to consider as we go through, what happens if they have some type of a hospital stay and need to be out, or they do come down with some type of a virus or a flu and they're going to be out for a while. In the past, it was always, let's try and catch them up when they come back, because that was the prototypical way we handled it in education as a whole. However, now that's not necessarily going to work. And the concern that many have, including myself, is more on the psychological side. Students, once they get back into the classroom, will be afraid to be taken out again. They won't want to stay home when they're not feeling well for fear that they'll never go back in. So that's another idea within this whole notion of holistic transitioning we'll need to be ready for and prepare for along the way. So I keep talking about this whole notion of holistic transitioning. And if it doesn't look like this, going from spot to spot, what does it look like? Well, it looks a little bit different. And the ironic thing, as you're watching this video now, any of you who saw my previous videos, any of you who have been with me as I've spoken to groups, notice one thing right off the bat: no sport coat. That's because it's time to hang up our coats, roll up our sleeves, and all get together in this together and working together on this. So in this video series, sorry, I'll be saying sport coat. The second thing you're noticing is this is a bit of a different prop. And for those of you who have gone back, perhaps former master's students of mine or that, you'll recognize the dry erase board. I love interacting, whether it's interactive or not. This is old school, just markers and dry erase. So we will be using this along with some other types of devices along the way that make sense in this whole idea of holistic transitioning. So holistic transitioning, what is it? What does it look like? It's a lot different. And I'm going to bring this a little bit closer. So you want to imagine, instead of us going through the stages of a student's life as though each of the events or each of the areas were a circle and then there was a passage of time to the next circle, that the students are actually that bigger black circle on the outside. And that within that, there's so much area, but there are three areas that come up and interact with each other quite often. And those areas are, first and foremost, right at the top of things, they're relationships. Relationships with parents, relationships with family, relationships with friends, relationships with the school. And then that moves on into relationships later on, whether it be in a workplace or in some type of a independent living or home environment. We also see in the green education, how that goes in. We will be going through, all of us can use education, but now education takes a different role for our individuals who are exceptional. And finally, that work area, the purple area is work. You'll notice that within those circles, as they come together, there's a triangle. And it's got little arrows going both ways. And that's because there's a flow going back and forth. What do I mean with the flow? We want to think of it first from a neurotypical point of view. We start as individuals and we learn some basic life skills, we learn some family skills. Not always something that our exceptional individuals are able to do or do in the same type of time frame that their neurotypical siblings might. Once we hit a certain developmental age, we move into school, and that's where we harness more relationships, but we also begin to develop our cognitive abilities as we go on. And within the context of school, obviously we're also developing other things. We're developing fine motor and gross motor activities. We're developing ways of interacting. And as we move through school, maintaining the idea of relationships, we also then begin to move toward, well, what does that world beyond school look like? And so on a neurotypical side of things, we may see high school students who are going out and getting part-time jobs. Younger students may have specific chores that they've got to do around the house. And those chores are something that will carry over into the context of people's lives. things we don't often think about. When we teach our children how to cook, what are we actually teaching them? We're teaching them a skill that will be with them throughout the context of their lives. For many of our exceptional individuals, that's not something that's going to be learned at a very early age. And for some of them, they may never be able to actually cook or even feed themselves. So we'll talk about that from a holistic standpoint too. But the idea is, for the neurotypicals, there's so much we assume as we go through this. We no longer can afford to assume any of these things when it comes to our exceptional individuals. All of a sudden, if there is some other type of environmental crisis that pulls them out of our environment and puts them back into whatever their home environment is, we need to be able to allow them to transition in a more natural format. We need to have them understand that it's okay when that speech language pathologist is coming and working with us via a video chat. It's okay when that OT or PT is actually stopping by and is outside and saying, hey, we want you to bring your hands up out of your wheelchair, or something else that they're being able to demonstrate to see the individual do it too. So we want to have those ideas set aside so that the transition is differentiated than it was this time. There are such high levels of anxiety going on right now. And so that's going to be one of the most critical things as we move back into the school setting. It's always interesting because as I've spoken with various groups, I've got some groups going, as soon as they get back to school, everything will be normal. Folks, there's no old normal anymore. We can't be. We've got to adjust, we've got to understand things. So as the students are coming back to school, one of the things we've got to recognize is that the anxiety levels that were at all-time highs before all this occurred are going to actually increase going back into school. Why? For our exceptional individuals, the anxiety is going to be in a couple of different ways. There may be some fear of going back into the environment. Will I catch a cold? Will I get sick? Will my friends be there? What happens if I get there and then this happens again and we have to go back out of this? How can I deal with that? And so we've got to, within the context of those first few weeks, really do some focal point work on knowing where our students are at anxiety-wise and transitioning back into what is going to be the newer routines they'll be dealing with. So that's one thing over the course of the summer as you're preparing things, and it's not going to be an easy summer of preparation. Why? We have to recognize we may need more assessments to go out because is there potentially a regression that has gone on? When we get these students back into our classrooms, are we going to see a gap between where some of them are at, where we'll have to individualize even more so than we've ever? When those students come back in, though, most importantly, how are we going to deal with them as they're excited to be back and yet a little bit nervous? Part of the excitement that we'll have to caution them on actually goes into the health side of things. How do we take care of things? So what I want to affirm with you first and foremost is when we look at this whole idea of moving from linear transitions to holistic transitioning, we are not, let me emphasize that, we are not reinventing the wheel. You are not going to have to redo everything you've ever done. No, that's silly. But what we need to do is the true idea of revisioning. Revision. When it comes to writing, and we heard it for so long in high school and that, you've got to revise your writing. And for us, what was that? Rewrite all over again. True revisioning is us seeing things, but seeing it in a new and different way. So we want to revise how we're doing some of our things with that eye toward, okay, what might be the changing environments? So we're not reinventing the wheel. The time that we spend doing this now and setting some things up during the summer will be done in a way that we can use those concepts over and over again. Those of us who taught in the 70s and 80s recognize the fact that we might have had filing cabinets as big as my bookshelves here with black-line masters that we could pull out, and for those of us who remember, go down to the ditto machine and then run off, 100 copies or so. We're going to have some tools that we'll be able to use that can be used both in the school setting and home, because we really want to be able to have more of a naturalized flow. Holistic transitioning means that it doesn't matter if you're at school, you're on the bus, you're at home, or you're somewhere else. There's a flow to things as it moves on. So we're not reinventing the wheel, but what we are doing is re-seeing where we're at and moving forward. In our next video, we're going to focus on, again, this whole idea of the classroom. What does this mean for the classroom those first few days? We want to take a look at that because the classroom is going to be different at first. Some of the lessons that we may have done in the past are past. We may need to actually rethink and restructure how we do things and take a look at our classrooms too. What are the changes we'll need to make? I thank you for what you've done so far. I'm excited that we're in this journey together. This journey is really going to strengthen what we're doing for our exceptional individuals. What we've been through is traumatic, and we need to remember that. There will be some post-traumatic stress going on with some of our individuals. But together we will get through this. Again, there's no one size fits all. That's why we'll just be presenting things here in this series to help you get started and think through what will be the best for your students. So again, thank you for all that you do, and I look forward to seeing you in our next video.